Borderlands The Pre-Sequel is a spin-off and entry that was meant to satiate the rabid cravings of the Borderlands fanbase in between entries. It didn't need to be a great project in the franchise. It could have basically served as more Borderlands 2, something to keep the audience content before a new full entry was developed. Despite this lack of responsibility, the pre-sequel ended up being a lot more than that. It iterates on Borderlands 2's mechanical upgrades gracefully, introducing new gameplay elements that shake up the formula, while also staying true to everything that the previous game did. The story successfully bridges the gap between the first two games in the series, and also develops the existing characters while introducing new ones to the franchise. In most ways, the pre-sequel surprised me. I didn't expect it to be anything great, but it really does manage to stand up among the greatest games that this franchise has. There are some ways that this game is just more Borderlands 2 though, which does hold it back a bit, but not by much. The only real negative that I can say about the pre-sequel is that it's lacking in endgame content. This is where expectation gets in the way of this project, because its additional content is absolutely dwarfed by its predecessor. But that doesn't mean that the core experience of the pre-sequel isn't worth it. New mechanics, interesting environments, an expanded world, a well-paced story, and even more guns and loot to capture from nefarious foes. But as a whole package, does the pre-sequel stand the test of time? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be reviewing Borderlands The Pre-Sequel, talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and every Australian lunar inhabitant in between. If you haven't seen my two previous videos on the Borderlands series, I would highly recommend checking those out now. It's worth having the development context to see how the series has progressed, and I will most likely be briefly spoiling the stories from those games while talking about this one. Spoiler warnings for Borderlands The Pre-Sequel. If you enjoyed the video and want to support the channel, consider liking and subscribing as it really helps me out. You can also head over to the Patreon and sign up, where I put out monthly media reports talking about all of the media I consumed for the previous month. I also review video game movie adaptations from time to time and have a ton of exclusive content over there. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Borderlands The Pre-Sequel. After the release of Borderlands 2 and its subsequent support with a variety of DLCs, most thought that the logical next option was a numbered entry in the series. To this end, many expected Gearbox to begin immediately working on Borderlands 3. This wasn't the case though, because as Pitchford had stated in many interviews, the company was now focusing on developing new IP and had far too much on their plate to focus entirely on Borderlands. Because of this, they would outsource two new projects, Tales from the Borderlands, developed by Telltale Games, and Borderlands The Pre-Sequel. The pre-sequel was co-developed by Gearbox and 2K Australia, with Australia taking more of the leading role on the project and Gearbox supervising. 2K Australia were actually big fans of the Borderlands franchise, and the feelings were mutual from the Gearbox side as well. The studio originally began as a subsidiary of Irrational Games, co-developing Freedom Force, Tribes Vengeance, and SWAT 4. In 2006, Take-Two Interactive acquired Irrational Games along with Irrational Games Australia. This would lead to them co-developing BioShock 1, 2, and Infinite. They were essentially thrown around onto any project that needed some help, treated pretty poorly, and finally given the responsibility of developing the Borderlands pre-sequel with Gearbox. While their efforts were successful in quality, it wasn't enough for 2K, who promptly shut them down after the game's release. Despite that, they gave the game their best effort. This, in a lot of ways, makes the pre-sequel 2K Australia's last hurrah, and you can feel that in this game. The team decided to inject a lot of Australia into the pre-sequel. Most of the residents of the moon that we explore in the game have Australian accents. This started out as placeholder voices being used by the Australian studio, which Gearbox ended up loving anyways, and decided that it would be funny if everyone on the moon was just Australian. The game also represents a sort of full circle moment for Borderlands. The first game was originally inspired by Mad Max, the post-apocalyptic Australian classic, and getting to have an Australian team work on a spin-off and make their mark on the franchise only felt right. Unfortunately, this would be 2K Australia's last game. Borderlands The Pre-Sequel was released on October 14th, 2014 in North America, on October 16th, 2014 in Australia, and October 17th, 2014 in the EU, all for the Sony PlayStation 3, Microsoft Xbox 360, and Microsoft Windows systems. The name of the game with the pre-sequel is Iteration. While Borderlands 2 was all about changing the formula from the first game, re-upping the things that it did well and fixing the things that didn't work, this game is really just about adding to everything that Borderlands 2 did. It's not necessarily trying to fix anything, because Borderlands 2 worked so well. It just wants to make additions on top of that. Most of the base game remains the same as Borderlands 2. That core idea is very much still present. This is a first-person shooter with heavy RPG elements. We complete quests to get experience and kill enemies to level up. We grab loot from our dead foes and from hidden chests, and we use that loot to upgrade our character to do more damage or decrease the amount of health an enemy can take from us. We can select between a variety of character classes to play, and the pre-sequel, of course, retains that Borderlands humor style that we've become familiar with at this point. But the absolute mountain of small changes that the pre-sequel makes is really where it sets itself apart. The first and biggest change is in that of the game's location. Since this is a story set between the events of Borderlands 1 and 2, we're focusing on Handsome Jack. The central question is, how did he become the maniacal villain that we see in the second entry? Well, to answer that question, we have to go to Pandora's moon, Elpis, and this is where the majority of the game takes place. Because of that, the gravity is a lot lower here. Since the gravity is a lot lower, jumping has changed quite a bit. Jumping in low gravity means we travel a lot further, and in addition to that, we have the ability to use a small jetpack burst to change or further our trajectory mid-jump. Because of this increased jump height and distance, level design is wildly different. This allows environments to be a lot more expansive, both on ground and in terms of verticality. We might encounter towers that we have to scale or great gaps that we have to cross. This allows for quest locations or even secret chests to be hidden in places that we wouldn't expect them. This also just gives the pre-sequel a much larger sense of scope. This game feels huge. Even though it's a spin-off and quite a bit pared down from Borderlands 2, each map is just massive. This also leads to a unique design for the game, because there's a large part of the gameplay and environments that separate it from other Borderlands entries. But the larger environment and low gravity doesn't just change exploration and movement, it also massively adjusts combat. We're essentially introducing a third dimension here when fighting enemies. We're no longer stuck to the ground. I mean, you could jump in the previous Borderlands games, but only for a second. We're now floating in the air, shooting at foes, either also flying with us or trying to chomp at our heels on the surface of the planet, and it feels damn good. There's something so satisfying about slowly floating down to the surface while pumping magazines into the enemies below you and taking them all out before you hit the ground. But this movement has a lot more to it than meets the eye, because on the moon there is not oxygen, at least not outside. If you're inside a building that has an atmosphere, then you don't need to worry, but outside, you have an O2 meter that slowly ticks down as you move around the planet. This is depleted further by using your boost, which is a small jet of oxygen taken from your stores. This also adjusts the way that gear works, because instead of equipping a relic, we now equip an O2 kit, which the denizens of Elpis actually call an Oz kit. I'm assuming because of the small 2 resembling a Z. The Oz kits have a variety of different stats that they adjust. They can change how much oxygen you have access to, your boost speed, and movement, but most importantly, they adjust the stats of your slam. The slam is another new introduction to the pre-sequel. It goes along with the atmosphere of jumping and floating around. While you're in the air, you can hold the crouch button to slam down on top of an enemy and release a thunderous explosion of damage in whatever particular element you have equipped. And again, slamming down on enemies feels incredibly satisfying. It's great to fly up in the air away from enemies, shoot them, and then jump down on their heads and stick them with some corrosive debuff. The whole package just adds a collection of new gameplay elements that make the game's combat a lot more dynamic and fast-paced. There's always another movement, another choice to make in combat to either get out of a situation or get closer to it. It feels like a natural evolution of Borderlands 2's systems in almost every way. But as with every Borderlands game, the pre-sequel introduces a host of new classes for us to try out and play. So let's talk about those now. The classes mostly function the same as in Borderlands 2. Each character has a different skill and specialty, and these characters all have their own unique skill trees. The pre-sequel had 4 classes on launch, and 3 additional classes released as DLC. I'll only talk about the base classes now and leave the DLC characters for a later section of the video. The 4 base characters are Athena, the Gladiator, Wilhelm, the Enforcer, Nisha, the Lawbringer, and Claptrap, the Frag Trap. Let's start with Athena. Athena was actually introduced in the Secret Armory of General Nox DLC all the way back in Borderlands 1, but she makes her return here as a playable character. Her main skill is the Kinetic Aspis, which allows her to wield a shield and absorb damage for a period of time. At the end of the skill, she can throw the shield and deal a certain amount of damage, plus the absorb damage, to enemies. Her 3 skill trees are Phalanx, Xiphos, and Serapunic Storm. The Phalanx tree mostly focuses on Athena's action skill and reducing damage all around. The first tier increases the damage dealt by the shield and the player's movement speed when it's equipped. The second tier gives allies health regen when the shield is active and increases the duration that the shield is held. The third tier has the first midway skill, Prismatic Aegis, which allows the shield to store elemental damage types. The fourth tier includes a skill called Clear, which allows you to give second wind to teammates when you throw your shield at them. The fifth tier increases the chance to reflect bullets with the shield and draws aggro off of enemies when the shield is out. The final skill, Wrath of the Goddess, allows the shield to ricochet off of enemies and bounce around. The second skill tree, Xiphos, focuses on melee damage and bleed. The first tier increases melee and gun damage and also raises Athena's max health. The second tier increases movement speed and damage done to enemies with less than half their health. The third tier has the first midway skill called Rend. Rend causes melee attacks to bleed, making enemies take damage over time for 12 seconds. The fourth tier contains Epicenter, making Athena's slam attack pull enemies towards you and deal more damage. The fifth tier causes enemies to explode from bleed damage and increases Athena's fire rate for each bleeding enemy. The final skill, Blood Rush, allows you to melee dash towards an enemy, which immediately resets its cooldown if a foe is killed with it. The third and final skill tree for Athena is Serapunic Storm, which mostly deals with elemental damage. The first tier has a skill called Maelstrom, which you're given stacks of when dealing incendiary or shock damage. Elemental damage increases per stack that you have. The second tier increases magazine size and shield regen. The third tier contains a skill called Smite, which allows you to smite enemies when airborne. This does incendiary and shock damage based on your Maelstrom attacks. The fourth tier has a skill called Zeus's Rage, which causes a fire and lightning storm at the location you throw your shield to. The fifth tier increases the spread of status effects and allows you to stall the loss of Maelstrom attacks after freezing an enemy. The final skill, Hades Shackles, causes anyone caught in your slam to be shock tethered to you. They are electrocuted for 3 seconds and you get 20 Maelstrom stacks for each one. Athena has a pretty big variety in what she's meant to do. On one hand, she can be this badass protector that holds her shield and deflects damage, a sort of Captain America that whips into battle and throws their shield around. Or she can be this melee elemental damage god, inflicting damage over time through fire and bleed effects. She's an all-around fun character, but honestly not one of my favorites in the pre-sequel. She is technically good and a well-designed class, but she just didn't fit with my specific playstyle. The second character included in the base game is Wilhelm, an engineer that would eventually turn into the giant robot boss that we fight in the second game. His action skill, Wolf and Saint, deploys 2 drones, one for combat and one for support. He has 3 skill trees, Hunter-Killer, Cyber Commando, and Dreadnought. The Hunter-Killer tree mainly deals with elemental damage and also increasing damage from the combat drone. The first tier buffs the Wolf combat drone and increases Wilhelm's damage. The second tier allows Wolf to deal corrosive damage and increases his fire rate. The third tier has a skill called Laser Guided, which allows you to focus a target with Wolf and Saint when using the skill, boosting Wolf's damage and increasing their uptime. The fourth tier has a skill called Kill Switch, which allows Wolf to explode into enemies when recalled. The fifth tier increases Freeze chance of cryo weapons and critical hit damage. The final ability, Omega Strike, allows Wolf to launch a massive missile strike against targets while it's out. The second tree, Cyber Commando, also deals with powering up Wolf, but focuses more on buffing Wilhelm. The first tier includes skills that increase gun damage and shield capacity. The second tier increases accuracy, crit damage, and gun damage. The third tier has a skill called Power First that changes Wilhelm's melee into an explosive punch. The fourth tier includes a skill called Shock Absorber that allows you to shoot and sprint at the same time. The fifth tier increases the damage radius of the slam and buffs gun usage overall. The final skill, Vengeance Cannon, allows you to use a laser blast when your shield is depleted. The third and final tree, Dreadnought, mainly focuses on buffing Saint, the support drone. The first tier increases the duration of the drones and their max health. The second tier allows Saint to boost shields and increase shield recharge rate. The third tier has a skill called Termination Protocols that replaces Fight for Your Life. You walk slower, but also you can fire weapons and shock nearby enemies. You have to keep the timer going or you release a nuclear explosion. The fourth tier includes a skill called 0 Hour that explodes Saint when he is recalled, deploying a healing zone behind him. The fifth tier increases max health and damage reduction. The final skill, Overcharge, allows Saint to release an energy wave when summoned. This energy wave gives you increased movement speed, fire rate, reload speed, and ammo regeneration. Wilhelm is a good, survivable, all-rounder character, but he does feel a bit pulled in multiple directions. I didn't find him the best to use, but his skills are certainly interesting. He almost functions as a leveled up Axton or Roland. The most interesting thing about his skill tree is that it's designed around the devolution of his character. We know that Wilhelm turns into a massive robot in the employ of Handsome Jack by the second game, so his skills sort of reflect this slippery slope. As he upgrades his cybernetics, he becomes more violent, losing parts of his humanity. The third character included in the base game, and my personal favorite, is Nisha the Lawbringer. Nisha actually appears in Borderlands 2, running the optional town of Lynchwood. She also ends up dating Jack at some point. Her action skill is Showdown, which is basically an aimbot that locks onto enemies and increases fire rate and damage while active. She has 3 skill trees, Law and Order, Fan the Hammer, and the Riflewoman. The first skill tree, Law and Order, mostly focuses on buffing the Order ability. The first tier contains this skill, which gives you stacks of Order for every 15% of your max health you take in damage. This gives you a higher chance to heal double the damage you've taken. The second tier contains a skill called Rough Rider that changes the slam. The slam now has increased damage, and it increases the maximum amount of Order stacks that we can have. Tier 3 includes the Discipline skill, which also increases the maximum Order stacks and also allows Order to refresh your shield and a number of other stats. Tier 4 includes a skill named Blood of the Guilty, which gives you Order and health when you kill an enemy. The fifth tier increases gun damage with low health and increases gun damage when killing an enemy. The final skill, Thunder Crackdown, raises Order stacks once again and changes the melee attack to a cone of lightning. The second skill tree, Fan the Hammer, mostly deals with increasing weapon damage and buffing the Showdown skill. The first tier increases movement speed and extends Showdown time. The second tier increases gun damage and shield restoration. The third tier includes a skill called Short Fuse, which makes shots explosive for a short period of time after killing an enemy. The fourth tier includes a skill called Pickpocket, which allows you to steal bullets from enemies by melee attacking them. The fifth increases damage done in Showdown, and the final skill, One for Each of You, allows you to dual wield 2 pistols, one a clone of the other you have equipped. The third and final skill tree, the Riflewoman, mainly deals with ricocheting bullets and increasing gun damage. The first tier increases accuracy and critical hit damage. The second tier increases gun damage and gives you a stackable buff called Unchained. Every second that you're shooting at an enemy, you get a stack of Unchained, which increases your fire rate. The third tier has a skill called Fistful of Bullets, which increases the magazine size of all weapons. The fourth tier includes a skill called Impatience, which gives you a stackable buff when killing an enemy that increases your reload speed. The 5th tier allows you to ricochet bullets off of surfaces, and the final skill, the Unforgiven, allows shots fired during Showdown to bounce from one enemy to another. All enemies that are hit explode when Showdown expires. Nisha is easily the most fun character in the pre-sequel for me. Turning on her Showdown ability means that all of your shots are most likely going to hit. Leveling her up and getting her to the point where bullets are ricocheting when you're in Showdown means you're a flying sheriff who's massacring everything in sight. It's just satisfying in every way that I could want it to be. The final character from the base game is Claptrap the Frag Trap. Now, while I don't particularly love playing as Claptrap, he is one of the most unique and interesting playable characters in any Borderlands game. His main skill is vaulthunter.exe, which actually takes stock of the current combat situation and then picks one of a bunch of different action packages, which change the way that the skill works for each one. The character starts with 7 default action packages that resemble other action skills from Borderlands 2. Minion Trap essentially replicates Axton's turret. Meat Unicycle replicates Krieg's buzz axe. Fun Zerker replaces Salvador's dual wield. Mecro Magician replicates Gage's death trap. Shush Trap replicates Zero's deception ability. Blightbot replicates Maya's Phoenix skill, and Rubber Ducky is a unique skill that causes Claptrap to bounce around and gain bullet reflection. The other action packages are unlocked through the skill tree. Claptrap has 3 skill trees: Boom Trap, I Love You Guys, and Fragmented Frag Trap. The first skill tree, Boom Trap, mostly focuses on explosive damage, as the name would signal. The first tier increases reload speed and health regen. The second tier gives a chance for non-explosive shots to become explosive and adds a blast wave to Claptrap when he's hit by a melee. The third tier has a skill called Second Wind by Tediore. This changes your fight for your life so that you throw a copy of Claptrap like a grenade that keeps exploding. The fourth tier includes a skill called I Am Rubber, You Are Glue. This unlocks the action package Torg Fiesta, which allows Claptrap to constantly throw grenades. The fifth tier can change your melee attack to an explosive punch, and the final skill, Living Near the Edge, unlocks the Pirate Ship Mode action package. This turns Claptrap into a pirate ship with 4 cannons that fire faster until it finishes. The second skill tree, I Love You Guys, mostly deals with support and healing. The first tier gives a buff when revived and increases status effect chance. The second tier includes a skill called Kick Him While He's Down, which unlocks the Clap in the Box action package. This summons a massive bomb that can actually damage allies as well. The third tier also has a skill called You're Going to Love Me that unlocks the Gun Wizard action package. This increases Claptrap's rate of fire massively and refills his ammunition. The fourth tier includes a skill called It's a Trap card that releases a healing nova when your shield goes down. The fifth tier buffs Claptrap upon gaining a second wind and increases his magazine size. The final skill, High Five Guys, allows you to request a high five from teammates. If reciprocated, you get gun damage, fire rate, and health regen bonuses. If you don't have teammates or don't get a high five back, you still get the benefits. The third tree, Fragmented Frag Trap, focuses on a mechanic called subroutines, which give Claptrap different buffs. The first gives you a skill called All the Guns, which gives you a random subroutine for a gun type and greatly buffs the usage of that gun. The first tier also includes a skill called Safety First, which gives you a subroutine for increasing health or shields. The second tier has a melee focus subroutine, and the third tier has a skill that multiplies the bonuses of all the subroutines. It also unlocks the One-Shot Wonder action package. This allows Claptrap to fully unload his weapon in one go, doing a lot more damage than usual. The fourth tier adds an elemental subroutine, and the fifth increases melee damage and slam. The final skill, Rainbow Coolant, unlocks the Laser Inferno action package. This causes a disco ball to float above the robot and do elemental damage to enemies. Claptrap is not what I would consider a super useful character. He can be good, of course, but there's a heavy reliance on RNG and chaos. But that's sort of what the spirit of the character is supposed to be. Claptrap himself is chaotic and unreliable, so you don't really know if he's going to do what you want, but that's what makes the character so interesting, because he plays like no other character in the Borderlands franchise. It's definitely fun to play and to check out at least once, but he's not my favorite overall. I think the entire cast is a wonderful surprise for the pre-sequel. While they are already established characters, I think that bolsters them a bit further. It gives them a personality that even the development team felt was lacking in Borderlands 2. We'll talk more about this when we get into story, but the characters' skills are also wonderfully themed. Watching Wilhelm slowly degrade and evolve over time, watching these characters become who they would be when we meet them, is an interesting take on the formula. They also happen to be incredibly satisfying to play. But that's not even where the gameplay changes to the pre-sequel end. One thing we haven't really talked about is loot. The pre-sequel works pretty similarly to Borderlands 2 in terms of rolling new items and gear in general. This is mostly because it's the same foundational system that Borderlands 2 was built on. The game does reduce the amount of rarities from Borderlands 2 though. That's mainly because half of the previous game's 11 rarities were introduced in DLC, and the pre-sequel only got one expansion. This means that the pre-sequel only has 6 rarities: common, uncommon, rare, epic, glitch, and legendary. Glitch is localized to the only DLC expansion that the game would release, but the others are available in the main game. There is technically one side quest E-Tech weapon in the game, but it doesn't really count because it is the only E-Tech weapon in the whole game. Despite that, the game does introduce not a lot of new rarities, but a sort of special effect. This is called Loonshine, and this can appear on any weapon. These effects are random, but can do anything from increasing grenade damage to giving you more experience from kills. The pre-sequel also replaces the iridium that was introduced in the last game with moonstones. The currency does effectively the same thing. You use it to upgrade your carrying capacity, and you can use it to unlock certain chests with better loot in them. In regards to loot, since slag is not present on Elpis, there's a new elemental weapon introduced. That's the cryo weapon. Cryo weapons can freeze enemies, at which point you do more damage to them with melee attacks. This goes hand in hand with laser weapons, which are an entirely new type of gun. They can be fired as small shots or even a beam, depending on the weapon that you get. The pre-sequel also introduces the grinder, which is a piece of machinery that you can interact with in the main town. You can place weapons into it and ideally get something better. It's a pretty interesting mechanic, sort of flirting with the idea of crafting weapons at this point in the series, but not fully. When pieced out individually, the new introductions to the pre-sequel aren't that revolutionary. A cold gun doesn't massively change things on its own, and neither does some new characters or oxygen management. But it's the way that these features are implemented to not only evolve the Borderlands formula that had been firmly established at this time, but also to respect the series' successes and keep those in place. The pre-sequel wasn't trying to ruffle many feathers or take big risks, just try out a few new things that could make the experience better. Now, I will say that this comes with some very light downsides. First of all, because the new environments are so open, it can make level design a bit wonky at certain points. Your destination or path to that destination is often not intuitive because there's also many tiers in buildings or even in open environments. Maps often overlap and don't have a good way to deal with it. It doesn't happen with 100% of the environments, and it's mostly a symptom of more freedom being introduced to the game. Could the maps have been tailored and telegraphed a bit more? Sure. It would have required a fine hand, but what we get in the end is mostly serviceable. It's also worth noting that a large complaint with this game being built on the Borderlands 2 engine and not changing a lot is that it does essentially feel like a larger Borderlands 2 DLC. It's much larger than any of the individual ones, probably outsizing even all 5 Borderlands 2 DLC as a whole, but it still just doesn't feel like a full evolution. And that has become sort of a part of the Borderlands DNA at this point. The first game was a massive risk for the studio, a step in a new direction, and the second game wasn't exactly taking the easy route. It completely revolutionized the game and took a massive risk on a new entry, so it makes sense that a game that feels so similar to the previous entry doesn't really have a nice place to be slotted in the Borderlands mythos. But the gameplay is only half of the story, so it's time we talk about Borderlands The Pre-Sequel's narrative. As Borderlands The Pre-Sequel opens, it doesn't start with Marcus Kincaid telling us a story like the other games, but we see Sanctuary as the Crimson Raiders have someone captured. This someone is Athena, one of the playable characters and the woman that we met in the General Knox DLC from the first game. Lilith asks Athena one question, why? To which Athena responds, it's a long story. Athena will be telling us the story. After the events of the General Knox DLC, she wandered the planet as a merc. She was then given a job by a Hyperion programmer to head to Elpis, Pandora's moon, and to help him hunt a vault. We then get the classic Borderlands introduction with a massive rocket overrun by bandits launching towards the Hyperion space station in the sky. We're introduced to each one of our characters one by one, and as the rocket malfunctions, the characters accept their doomed fate. Fortunately, they manage to survive the crash and are immediately put to work by a claptrap to save Jack, who's currently under attack on the station. Colonel Zarpedon and her Lost Legion are currently attempting to overthrow the way station. We have to drive off the Lost Legion and then we'll be able to go after the vault on the moon. As we head to the escape ships, we encounter the Colonel and her Guardian as she destroys the vehicles that were our way out of here. Tacitor contacts after we escape the Colonel. He is the CEO of Hyperion and will consistently remind Jack of his place within the company. Our goal at this point is to move through the station and activate the moonshot cannon. We can ride a piece of cargo down to the moon using this massive piece of equipment. On the way, we fight a small mini-boss named Flame Knuckle, a medium-sized mech armed with flamethrowers. As we move through this facility, Jack notes our character's competence, saying that he needs more people like us on his team.
You sure about this? Probably gonna die up here.
Now you saved my life a couple of times, I'm repaying the favor. Besides, I'm a hero, baby. Self-sacrifice is part of the job.
As we head to the moon, Jack is set upon by Lost Legion soldiers. He's trapped on Helios with these people as a massive battle rages in the sky. On Moonside, a woman named Springs contacts us to help with our desperate situation, considering that we have no oxygen on the surface of the moon. Springs is going to help us get back to the Helios station, but before that, we need to take out a jamming signal coming from the moon. She recommends that we head to a local town called Concordia and gets us suited up for the journey ahead. She also gives us a quick job to take out Deadlift, the leader of a local band of scavengers. We can turn ourselves into a living conduit and invade Deadlift's facility. The boss himself looks like a 60s deep-sea diver with electrocution powers. Despite his apparent ability to swim, we kill him pretty quickly. This gives us a key which we can use to unlock the first of our lunar vehicles. On the way, Springs gives us a bit of an insight into Elpis' history, which originally started out, as most things do, involved with the Dahl Corporation. Heading back to Springs, she gives us a small device called an Orbitron, which will get us into Concordia. This pacifies the cop claptrap at the front entrance to the city, but only after he gives us a few tickets for insubordination. We're then introduced to Nurse Nina, this game's medic and harsh but lovable Russian version of Dr. Zed. She decontaminates us with some light electrocution, and we're contacted by Jack once more. He wants us to talk to the sheriff of Concordia, who's also the mayor, so he calls himself the Mariff. He used to work for Hyperion, so Jack believes that he technically is the Mariff's superior, but he really doesn't want to meet with us. This greatly aggravates Jack, so we have to go for Plan B. We head to the local bar where we meet Roland and Lilith. They happen to be on vacation, but Moxie is here and does decide to help us. She was in a relationship with Jack, but has supposedly left that in the past. We're introduced to the Moonstones here and the new Crazy Earl store. We then attach some transmitters to the comm towers to try and locate the jamming signal. This part of the game is actually one of my least favorite in the pre-sequel. It really doesn't fit with the pace of the rest of the game and feels mostly out of place. We go from high-tension battles non-stop to fooling around in the city for far too long. Because Concordia also has a more vertical layout than Sanctuary did, it's nowhere near as navigable. It can honestly be kind of a mess to get around in, but just slowing the game down for 45 minutes or so to do these small quests in Concordia is a real bummer. Luckily, it doesn't happen very often in the game. Once we get the transmitter set up, we're sent to the Crisis Scar, where we can find the origin of the jamming signal. While we're on this mission, Jack tells us that Zarpedon and her troops have taken control of the space station, and they start using it to fire blasts of laser into Elpis. At the comms tower, we can fight a boss named Red Belly, which is actually two bosses. Red, a smaller flying enemy, and Belly, a larger bandit that stays on the ground. With the jamming signal terminated, Jack can now finally leave the space station and meet us in Concordia. He's brought with him a massive hatred for the Marif that runs the town because he's working with Zarpedon. We can then convince a claptrap unit to let us into the Marif's office. He confronts the man about the jamming signal and tries to get information on Zarpedon from him. But as Jack walks away, the Marif shoots at him and Jack kills him. We're then set on a mission to find a military artificial intelligence. We have to first go assemble a new lunar vehicle and then find someone out in the wild named Pickle. We have to head to the Drakensberg, a massive crashed ship in Pity's Fall. After taking some time to activate a large bridge, we can enter the ship and jettison the main engines to get access to the rest of the vehicle. We then have a boss fight with the bosun, a man on a flying chair with shield generators all around him. This allows us to take the AI core and we can speak with Skipper. We meet Skipper halfway through this mission. Her real name is actually Felicity, and she turns out to be the AI aboard the Drakensberg. She was being controlled by the bosun and is now excited to be freed from her crashed prison. Jack plans to use this AI core to build an army of Hyperion robots. To this end, we take a train to the Titan robot production plant. This place is infested with torques, small insect-like creatures that skitter across the ground and make me really annoyed. We have to take a roundabout path throughout the facility because there's so many doors locked and areas blocked off. We meet a man named Gladstone in here. He worked for R&D but convinced the invaders in the facility that he was a medic to keep himself alive. Turns out he has a prototype for a master bot that will construct other robots. We end up crafting a constructor just like the ones that we would come face to face with many a time in Borderlands 2. This involves grabbing scrap parts from other robots, installing a torso cage, and troubleshooting the turret's aiming systems. This is probably one of the best missions in the game, not only because it's taking us through a piece of history, but also because we're visually creating what is essentially a character. Gathering the pieces and the parts to bring something to life and moving it through a facility. It's a shifting goal that's visually and mechanically satisfying. We eventually install Felicity into the constructor bot, to which she has many reservations. Installing her causes her to go haywire, and we have a boss fight with the constructor. We can't destroy this though, we just rein it back in. The bot then starts immediately crafting an army of Hyperion machines. This is also sort of where the slippery slope begins for Jack. Felicity begs to not be put in the machine, and with just a bit more time, we could have just copied her into the robot instead. But Jack, of course, doesn't care and does what he needs to do to get the space station back. The devolution probably started when he killed the Marif out of anger, something that he notes felt oddly good.
What is wrong with you? Oh, that was invigorating. Okay, yeah. Where was I?
It's not that this game showcases some normal guy breaking bad, but someone who is already morally questionable, turning into an absolutely evil tyrant. Back at Moxie's, Jack has decided to start the space station assault with his robot army in tow. Roland and Lilith decide to come along, but unfortunately the group gets split up when using the fast travel station. Our task is simple though, to get to the Eye of Helios, the massive core at the center of the space station that activates the lasers. Jack wants it intact though, not destroyed. He gets his office back and we have to guide a claptrap bot around for far too long while we're trying to gain entrance. There is a long and winding journey from here to the Eye of Helios. Gladstone and 3 of his scientists are trapped, so we have to save them. Once we take down the defenses, we can link back up with Jack, Lilith, and Roland. We give Jack a cloaking device from one of the doctors, the same device that he would ironically later use to murder Roland. Before we move out, Jack decides to also slaughter all of the rescued scientists because he found out that one of them helped Zarpedon. Jack has sped up his development into an evil and cruel villain by a factor of 10. Lilith starts to speak out, but Roland stops her. We end up heading through the veins of Helios and get even closer to the eye at the center. We have to get to the laser core to shut the thing down. Before we get access, though, we have a huge boss fight with a towering mech piloted by Colonel Zarpedon. It's actually a pretty tough fight because this mech just manages to do so much damage to us. Once we take it down, though, Zarpedon exits the suit and fights us herself. She's wielding a massive staff that shoots out different bursts of energy. As she's bleeding out, she tells Jack where the vault is, but cautions him against opening it. He kills her before she finishes her sentence. Inside the laser core, Moxie guides us through shutting down the eye, which turns out to be the actual eye of the destroyer from the first game's vault. We shut down the laser, but Moxie, Lilith, and Roland reveal their true plan. They've been working against Jack this whole time and guided him improperly through the laser shutdown, creating a massive singularity in front of the space station. It pulls off the station's laser, and Jack is enraged at this point. He sends us to head back to the moon to seek out the vault and find the goods that we originally came here for. On the way, we meet more of the Guardians, the same ones that were guarding the vault from the first game. At the site, we fight the RK-5, a speeding piece of aircraft that launches barrage after barrage of missiles at us. We're then sent underground to explore a massive Iridian structure underneath the surface. In addition to Guardians, there's a ton of Lost Legion soldiers down here as well, attempting to make a last stand. At the center, we're transported to a massive floating structure. We have to navigate this to find the vault entrance. Lilith tries to give Jack a chance to leave, but he and we decide to continue. Inside the vault, we're confronted with the final Guardian, the Sentinel. We fight a battle that's pretty similar to Zarpedon's human form, except the Sentinel changes elements at different phases, and also reflects a ton of damage back at us. When we take it down, it sinks into the surface and arises as the Empyrean Sentinel, a massive version of itself with twisting faces, even stronger than before. These two bosses represent the final two for the game, and they're actually fantastic. I quite like them overall. The introduction of some genuine mechanics for the boss battles is a step in the right direction for the series, as opposed to just large enemies which soak bullets. Once we defeat the Sentinel, it drops a large vault symbol, the one that we've seen before. Jack interacts with it and is shown a vision of the future, of the warrior, and how he will release it from the vault on Pandora. Lilith steps in at this moment and punches the symbol into Jack's face, causing the scar that necessitated the mask we see him with in the second game. He tells Athena that he's ready to let the warrior out and to begin his quest for revenge. Athena tells the Vault Hunters in the present that she left his employ after this. Lilith orders her death, but before the shots hit her, a Guardian steps in and warns the crew that war is coming, and they'll need everyone they can get. We then see a scene of Jack killing Tacitor and taking over the Hyperion Corporation, officially adopting the Handsome Jack name that we would see him with later. At the core of the pre-sequel story, it is attempting to dissect the downfall of a villain. Athena lovingly calls Jack a hero at one point, and he did save the Vault Hunters on the Helios station. But by the end, Jack is a far cry away from this hero status so generously given. His actions throughout the game are so egregious that the Vault Hunters go behind his back to stop him because they are aware of what he could become. And they were right, he became something far worse by the second game. Because Lilith and Roland's quote-unquote relationship to Handsome Jack is recontextualized, the story of the second game is further recontextualized itself. Lilith must ask herself the question after Roland dies, should I have killed Jack when I had the chance? But maybe that's what separates the Vault Hunters from Jack in the end, the fact that they don't suppose a future where someone can't change, that they don't prescribe actions onto someone that haven't happened yet. The characters that we play are also further contextualized as well. Nisha, Wilhelm, Athena, and Claptrap all have their part to play in this story, and unlike the previous Borderlands games, each character is allowed the freedom to speak back to the characters that are speaking to them. There's unique dialogue for each character in the game, and this makes playing with different classes distinct. This makes the story and choices of those in Jack's party all that more interesting. Athena decided to abscond from Jack, Wilhelm continued working for him and fell further down the hole, and Nisha decided to carve out her own piece of Pandora. The Moon of Elpis, for all its flaws in level design that I talked about before, does have a distinct look and vibe. You can feel that you're not on Pandora anymore, that this is a separate place, not just because of the low gravity and lack of oxygen, but because of the enemies, the way things are built, and the way people speak. It's world building done in the Borderlands way, the only way that the series knows how to. Differentiate a place and time, but also to not make those differences too realistic to become boring. The pre-sequel lands in a strange place, though, for the franchise so far. Its story is somewhere in between Borderlands 1 and 2, not just literally in the chronology, but also in terms of quality. It's not quite as good as Borderlands 2, it doesn't feel like it has that level of depth or stakes, but it also isn't as simple as Borderlands 1. There are facets of both that bleed into the game though. The simple nature of the first game is felt here, with a story that revolves around a lot of logistical problems, eventually culminating in one single goal. But the more complex writing style of Anthony Birch also applies here, using these characters and giving them real and interesting motivations, intertwined with moments of comedy to alleviate it all. The pre-sequel definitely doesn't lean towards the serious though, not as much as the second game did. It doesn't have as many of those moments that cut through the humor and push reality back in. But of course, as with any Borderlands game, it doesn't quite end there. So let's talk about DLC. One of the biggest things holding this game back is that it didn't have nearly as much content or as many expansions as the previous entry. There were 2 initial expansions that were basically just Circle of Slaughter maps, the Shock Drop Slaughter Pit and the Holodome Onslaught. Both were maps where you could fight increasingly difficult waves of enemies for a reward if the challenge was completed. 2 full characters were released for purchase though, the first being the Doppelganger. He is one of Jack's doppelgangers, apparently deciding to take the job to pay off his student loans. His action skill is Expendable Assets, which lets you summon 2 Digi-Jacks, which are essentially turrets that fire at enemies and hit ones that come within striking range. His 3 skill trees are the Hero of this Story, Greater Good, and Free Enterprise. The first skill tree, the Hero of this Story, deals with buffing the Digi-Jacks' abilities while deployed. The first tier in the skill tree increases the length of the Digi-Jacks and increases maximum health. The second tier has a skill called You Have My Shield that gives the Digi-Jacks a copy of your own shield. The third tier has a skill called Jack's Cash, which gives you a stack of cash whenever killing an enemy. The cash stacks can be thrown in place of a grenade. On the same tier, the skill Inspire allows Jack to monologue, which has a visual effect on screen, but doesn't affect gameplay at all, which is pretty funny. The fourth tier has a skill called On My Mark, which allows your Digi-Jacks to throw copies of your grenades while they're out. The fifth tier increases the action skill cooldown and damage resistance for the Digi-Jacks. The final skill, Promote the Ranks, allows your first Digi-Jack to be a badass one. This comes with increased health and damage and an incredibly powerful Digi-Missile Barrage. The second tree, Greater Good, buffs Digi-Jacks but also prevents damage from the doppelganger himself. The first tier increases weapon damage and introduces a new stack effect called Collaborate. You gain a stack of Collaborate when a Digi-Jack dies and gain a 1% damage bonus per stack. The second tier includes a skill called Diversify, which allows Digi-Jacks to fire shotgun laser blasts. The third tier includes a skill called Commitment, which gives you a buff when a Digi-Jack dies or when an ally goes in to fight for your life. The fourth tier includes a skill called Accountability. This is similar to Commitment, except that you gain stacks when Digi-Jacks take damage. The fifth tier includes a skill called Potential that creates a shock nova when a Digi-Jack dies, and the final skill, Leadership, allows Digi-Jack deaths to grant a second wind activation for Jack. The final tree, Free Enterprise, mostly deals with fire rate, swapping weapons, and specifically buffing damage upon picking up money. The first tier increases weapon swap speed and gives you a buff when swapping weapons. The second tier increases the chance to reload weapons when throwing a grenade. The third tier skill, Money is Power, gives you a stackable buff when picking up cash. This buff increases gun damage and can stack up to 999 times. The fourth tier has a skill called Merger, which changes Jack's melee to a shock laser. The fifth tier includes a skill called Laser Surplus, transforming the slam attack to an explosion of lasers. And the final skill, Sponsored By, gives you a different bonus based on the gun you last held in your hands. Doppelganger is another interesting character that feels as if it's themed more around Jack than it is his doppelganger. I wish that it would lean more into buffing the character when it takes damage, because that's what Jack had the doppelgangers made for. They are essentially body shields for him, and I feel that isn't as reflected here. But I guess the design leans more into replicating Jack's personality authentically, and from that lens, it works. Jack is also another fun character that feels like it delights in experimentation. That being said, Jack still feels satisfying to play. It's not so random that you can't make a reasonable build with him. The second and final DLC character that was released is Aurelia. Aurelia is actually the sister of Sir Hammerlock and the heiress of their family's fortune. Her relationship with her brother is strained because she doesn't treat him very well. Her action skill is Cold as Ice, which causes her to throw out a frost shard that locks onto enemies and deals damage over time. If the enemy dies, the shard moves to another enemy. Aurelia's 3 skills are the Huntress, Cold Money, and Contractual Aristocracy. The first tree, the Huntress, mainly buffs guns and mostly snipers. The first tier increases critical damage and bullet speed. The second tier includes a skill called Long Range Killer that allows long-ranged shots to damage based on the distance you are from the target. The third tier includes a skill called Silver Lining, which allows you to add bullets in your magazine when killing enemies with critical hits. The fourth tier includes a skill called Magic Bullet. This allows you to regenerate health when scoring critical hits. The fifth tier increases gun damage and buffs Aurelia when she takes melee damage. The final skill, Custom Loads, gives you a small timing minigame when using a sniper rifle, and scoring a critical causes a nova to appear on the enemy. The second tree, Cold Money, mostly deals with cryo damage. The first tier gives you a stackable buff called Avalanche when you do damage to an enemy. Each stack gives you higher cryo damage and more of a freeze chance. The second tier includes a skill called Winter's Fury, which adds knockback to the action skill. The third tier includes a skill called Fragment Rain, which causes fragments to fly from Cold as Ice when it lands on an enemy. The fourth tier includes a skill called Polar Vortex, which allows the Frost Shard to create a singularity, pulling in enemies. The fifth tier allows you to emit a Cryonova when your shield is depleted, and the final skill, Wintertide, turns all of your non-freeze guns into freeze weapons when an enemy is killed. The final tree, Contractual Aristocracy, mostly deals with buffing contracts with other players. The first tier includes a skill that gives you accuracy when killing enemies. Another skill on the same tier, Contractual Obligations, allows you to sign contracts with your allies. This makes allies your servants, which gives them increased shield capacity, and you gain increased gun damage. The second tier includes a skill called You First, which restores some of your servant's shield when killing an enemy. The third tier includes a skill called Excellent Shot, Madam, that allows you to deal cryo damage to enemies that have damaged your servants. The fourth tier has a skill called All Glory to the Master, which buffs you whenever you kill an enemy that was damaged by your servant. The fifth tier increases shield recharge delay and fire rate, and the final skill, A Backhand to Remember, changes your melee attack to become a backhand, which deals cryo damage. It also motivates you and your servants, which gives you all a buff. Aurelia is an interesting character with really, really good design. All of her skills have this haughty, sort of uptight and narcissistic worldview baked into them. It very accurately reflects her character and is one of the characters in the game that makes you genuinely feel like you're playing a villain. Like the doppelganger, she's also incredibly satisfying to play and relies a lot on dealing cryo damage, which was introduced in this game, and it just feels great to have a character based around that new mechanic. The final DLC released for the game was called Claptastic Voyage. It was the only actual story expansion released. The expansion starts as Claptrap begs Athena to tell another story. This one takes place as the Vault Hunters were forced to travel into Claptrap's head. It takes place after Jack has killed Tacitor and is looking for a collection of secret Hyperion blueprints called the H-Source. This happens to be hidden inside of Claptrap's mind. Jack then digitizes the crew to head inside of Claptrap's head. We quickly meet Claptrap's consciousness, an ethereal form of Claptrap that guides us through his mind. He takes us to the system administrator to try and get the H-Source, but we are quickly stopped by security protocols. As we make our way to Memory Bank 2 to look for the source of the code, we're stopped by lots of Claptrap defenses. Both parts of his mind that are attempting to stop us from rooting around, and viruses that are looking to eliminate us. We eventually get to a memory cluster in Claptrap's mind, specifically of his time in Firestone. We have to reconstruct his memory of the place despite his protests against it. This allows us to travel through a version of Pandora from the past, where we eventually find the H-Source. It's unfortunately quarantined by security protocols, so we need to go on another hunt. Jack orders us to free Shadow Trap, a locked up part of Claptrap's mind, because he might know where the H-Source is. We have to get an override key to do this though, which of course causes us to venture into another of Claptrap's memories. This one is far less simple and nostalgic. First of all, Claptrap doesn't even want us to see this memory, so his mind is repressing the basic facts. This causes us to have to relive the memory through his shoes. We learn the story of the day Claptrap assisted with the setting up of a fighting arena that was having its opening ceremony in the town of Overlook. He was supposed to get some fireworks and was explicitly told which ones to get, but grabbed the wrong ones because he thought they would be more explosive. They were so explosive that they launched the arena off the side of the cliff. When trying to make the situation better, he ended up causing a fire that killed a lot more people. Claptrap has always been kind of labeled as a fuck-up. He's a robot that doesn't really have a place in this world. He tries to help where he can, and the thing he's best at is bringing energy. He assists in helping us with the events of Borderlands 2, but he often makes mistakes. He's annoying, and people generally avoid him. Learning that he messed up is nothing new, but learning that he is so shameful of this memory is something new. He's buried the memory deep inside because he doesn't want to think about it. This DLC, if you couldn't already tell, attempts to characterize Claptrap the same way that Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep attempted to humanize the titular character further. In some ways it succeeds, but it definitely isn't as successful at its job as the previously mentioned expansion was. It doesn't lean hard enough into that desperate emotional element as it could. After fighting off Claptrap's manifestations of denial and grabbing the override key, we can free Shadowtrap. This immediately turns out to be an awful plan, as he reveals that he's actually a bad guy and is going to do bad things right away. We chase him deeper into Claptrap's mind, where we have to rescue his hope and self-esteem. Shadowtrap is essentially revealed to be Claptrap's shadow self. He's a reflection of what Claptrap could have been if he fed into the betrayal and fear forced onto him by others. We eventually have a boss fight with Shadowtrap, but after defeating him, he reveals this to be a trick. We then have a fight with him for the final time as his much more powerful form. This is probably one of the most difficult boss fights in the entire game. He takes a mech form and then the form of a giant space station. After exiting Claptrap's mind, we can give Jack the H-Source. It's exactly what he wanted, and he plans to even use it to eliminate the Claptraps themselves. After doing this, Claptrap's line is essentially wiped out. The Claptrap that we know is then shot in the eye by Jack and placed on the frozen wastelands of Pandora, where our heroes would inevitably meet him again in the second game. Overall, this DLC is pretty good, even though the story isn't everything I wanted it to be. I think it really does the best at what it was trying to do, which is to further characterize the Claptrap character. Also, the environments in this DLC are some of the best in the entire game. The shifting halls of Claptrap's mind, the swirling tunnels of the Nexus, it all feels great to play around in, and the environments feel like they fit the jetpack systems that we've grown used to in the base game. There's also some really good side quests, like Claptrap's consciousness trying to protect TK Baha and his wife, even though it's all in his mind. This expansion also introduces a new rarity, Glitched. These weapons will regularly change properties, and they're super fun to use. I had a pistol that would go from very high fire rates with lower damage to incredibly low fire rates with really high damage. It makes you constantly switch up your playstyle in a really interesting way. The DLC for the game overall, as you can tell though, is pretty lackluster. There's really only 2 characters in one expansion. That expansion is good, but the whole package doesn't allow for a lot of extended playtime. But of course, no discussion of a Borderlands game would be complete without talking about Endgame. By far the most disappointing part of the pre-sequel is its endgame. Borderlands 2 set a very big precedent for the series. It had 10 endgame bosses, multiple expansions, and many reasons to keep playing the game for a long, long time. This was the natural progression of the series formula, extending the game people already enjoyed and giving them a reason to keep going. The pre-sequel doesn't really have this. In fact, it only has one raid boss. That boss is the Invincible Sentinel, which is just a stronger version of the final boss from the game. It's really nothing special and definitely isn't a reason to keep playing or getting stronger. The game does have True Vault Hunter and Ultimate Vault Hunter modes, so if you really want to, you can try and hit max level and journey through the story again to get more loot. But realistically, the pre-sequel feels like a step backwards in endgame progression for the series. It feels closer to Borderlands 1 than it does 2. And that sort of makes sense because it was more of a spin-off than a full-fledged sequel. But the game was quality enough on its own that if it was supported, it would have had a better legacy in the long run. It doesn't make the game awful or detract from the story and mechanics that it introduces, but it certainly does reduce the replayability for a game that's in the Borderlands series after all. Borderlands The Pre-Sequel is a fine entry. It takes place between Borderlands 1 and 2, and fittingly, its quality lands itself there as well. It's a bit more interesting both mechanically and narratively than the first game, but it certainly doesn't have all of the weight that Borderlands 2 did. I would most likely place it somewhere closer to Borderlands 2 than Borderlands 1, but I can understand the disappointment. The base game really shows a lot of promise, and when I had finished the singular expansion and the only raid boss, I was left feeling unsatisfied. Maybe Borderlands 2 had actually set a bad precedent. Too much content in too short of a period. Too much progress in one game makes the audience feel like that bar must be raised or met for something to be a worthy successor. Borderlands 2 was good enough that it sparked a greed in the fans that might never be met again. Borderlands The Pre-Sequel got mixed reviews on release. It currently stands at a 77 out of 100 for the PS3 version of the game on Metacritic. New mechanics were praised, as was the writing, but some critics felt the art direction was lacking and that the ending was abrupt. The pre-sequel didn't meet sales expectations on release. It would sell more copies when it was later bundled with the earlier games, but it wasn't enough to continue support for the game. In fact, a second planned DLC for the game titled Luxie's Space Adventure was actually cancelled. The third game in the series wouldn't release for quite some time, but before Borderlands would get to that entry, they shifted down another path that was quite unfamiliar. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Hey Dad, thanks for watching this video. Once again, I really appreciate your support on this series. I've really been having fun dissecting this franchise because it's something I wouldn't normally do. If you want to support the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, leave me a comment letting me know how you felt about the Borderlands game, The Pre-Sequel. Was it a good spin-off or would you have preferred to wait for the sequel? If you want to join this list of amazing people right here and support the channel further, you can head over to my Patreon and subscribe, where I post monthly media reports of everything that I've consumed in the previous 30 days. I also post reviews of video game movie adaptations from time to time. There may or may not be a Borderlands movie review coming there soon, so check it out. See you next time. Bye, Dad.